All right, so we are live. Welcome to Wellness Sessions for Musicians. We are so excited to have guest Eddy Malave today. Eddy is a professional violist and an Alexander Technique teacher. So Eddy will be discussing the importance of instrument setup and practice environment today. So to get started, we want to make sure that you have a piece of paper nearby and a pencil or something to write with, preferably pencil if you have one. And Eddy would like us to start by just drawing what you think your spine and neck structure look like, and then shading in where you think the muscles of the neck are. And while you're doing that, I will turn it over to Eddy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica and Francesca, for having me, and Darwin for inviting me for this talk. I actually am going to ask Francesca to pull up the two photos just for a moment, and I would like for you just to use a little bit of observation awareness. So you can see the first image right here is a flutist in recital, and you can see about her. Just see if you can pay attention about her use specifically. And then just to get a visual, just to make it, we're going to compare later. I'm going to ask the other image to be pulled up as well. And here you can see a flutist who seems to be a little bit poised differently. So you can see by the arrows of how we're talking about being well balanced from within. But if we can go to the first one, just to take a look. Now, unfortunately, there's no arrows that I can go by, but if I use terminology such as being pulled down in the neck and the head region, you can see the shoulder region and the trapezius muscles being engaged a little bit more, and the back and the torso is being collapsed a little bit. If we can go back to the other image just one more time, we can see that there's a much more natural state of balance in posture playing the flute in this case. By the way, this talk is geared towards flutists, but all musicians all instruments are welcomed, and we're going to be experimenting momentarily. But thank you, Francesca, for having that up there. And now, what I want to talk to you about is, well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself because you guys might be wondering, I'm a violist, and you guys might be wondering, well, what does a violist have to do to tell a flutist anything? There's multiple reasons and stuff. I think most of you would be actually educators, so you shouldn't be afraid to actually learn about other instruments, asking questions, getting to know it. I'm not. No one has to. I don't play the flute, but I've certainly asked enough questions. In fact, I had a wonderful chat with Francesca not so long ago, and I learned tremendously about people who have injuries and the different types of flutes that are out there. And I know about all these little teeny tiny things, but I am an Alexander teacher, and Alexander technique is for everybody, and it goes beyond music. It actually comes from the dramatic arts, but it's a skill for life, let's just say. So you can be typing, you can be washing dishes, you can be brushing your teeth and picking your. So this is what this is more of about. So that's basically my little spiel about myself, and it's very relevant. But I will talk to you really briefly for those of you who don't know about FM Alexander himself. I'll let you know that he was born in Northwest Wynyard, Tasmania, that heart shaped little island south of Australia, in the year of 1869, and he died in London, England in 1955. Now, if you look at the dates that he was born, he was born before any of this that we're dealing with right now. However, he was alive, aside from living through two world wars, he was alive during the Industrial Revolution, where he actually saw people's habits of use change. And this is very soon there after his own personal discovery. Very quickly, I'll tell you that he was a monologist in his young life, meaning that's a very fancy word to say a Shakespearean actor. And he went around Australia reciting Shakespearean monologues, and to a very successful degree. It's very well documented, not just by his own accounts, but he was well known. Thing is, he was becoming hoarse after a lot of performances, and he would often, in one particular case, let's just say, there was a tremendous performance that he had to give, and he actually lost his voice in public in front of hundreds of people during a thing. So I think a lot of us can relate to how devastating that could have been. because I know I personally have had performances that it was out of my control, and it affects you emotionally for some reason that we get attached to these things, because we have a passion for what we love to do. Now he actually recognized that his setup, his being, his organic body was not set up properly to when he was actually giving his monologues. So through a 9 year period, as it's been written, that it took him for his self discovery, he recognized that he was pulling his head back and down, crunching his neck muscles, pulling back and down, shortening the neck, and affecting his larynx and vocal cords, which actually gave him issues. And it was his self discovery from that, but it was his setup that made him go through. So we're going to go through some exercises momentarily, but I'm going to ask you all right now to take an instrument. Um, Obviously, I'm speaking to the flute symposium, and I'm just going to ask you guys, anybody who's a pianist or percussionist or violinist watching or violist, please feel free to just play something. And I'm actually going to say, take two phrases of a piece, and clearly you guys are muted, and just have that freedom knowing that you can just take two phrases, and you can watch Francesca if you guys can see. Um, just to play, pick up the instrument and play, because we're going to make a comparison through this little journey that I'm hoping to go through right now. And yeah, you're just taking your time just to play. It's a normal thing that you guys are doing, right? Thumbs up, maybe. Yeah, it's a normal thing. You're able to play. Great. So we're gonna press pause on that for just a moment. But now I'm gonna talk to you about what is the Alexander technique. What was his discovery, and how does it apply to you? How does this apply to you in your setup? So I like to actually say academically that the Alexander technique is a re-education of one's posture through movement and breathing. That's an educated academic definition that I actually like to give. So going a little bit further, you see that I'm kind of using this word posture. So right now, using awareness and observation, I'm going to ask you all, just to in your seat, let's get your idea of what a good posture is. I'm going to ask you to sit in your chair, and you're going to actually adapt yourself to come into a good posture. And notice how that feels, right? Just notice how that feels. Now I'm going to use a word. Now I will tell you for the record that Alexander himself did not like this word that I'm about to say. I'm going to use the word relax. You're just going to relax out of that good posture. And usually, if I'm in an interactive room, I'm able to ask people directly with a show of hands and talk. And this is a bit new for me to actually speak to a screen and to give some ideas. But I'm just going to go for it. Most people, when I use the word relax, there's a series of things that come up that they're using awareness and observation. Um, I'm sorry for my hand gestures. I'm just so used to having a blackboard behind me. But what I was going to say is that most people want to use the word relax out of this idea of a good posture. They notice that something changed, whether they moved in space. I'm not going to tell you what you guys individually had, what your personal experience is. Some people recognize they moved in space. They've let go of tension somewhere, maybe in the legs, something that maybe they moved back and down. That everyone's individual experience is unique unto themselves. But that's been the general basis of what people generally say when I use the word relax. I'm going to ask you now to get into that good posture again. You're going to get into the good posture, and now I'm going to ask you, notice, using observation and awareness, what are you sensing? Now, are you stiff anywhere? How is your breathing compared to when you first automatically went into your idea of a good posture? Now, some people actually talk about their lower back, maybe shallow breath, maybe their legs being pulled in. Everyone's experience is different. Some people don't even feel anything, and that's completely fine, by the way. But I'm really grasping at awareness and observation and awareness. So now you can just let that go and sit down normally as you normally would. But that's an idea of using this is what Alexander was the point of the beginnings of talking about this, challenging the idea of good posture. As most of you know about the Alexander technique and body mapping or Feldenkrais, this actually falls into somatics, the work of somatics, which is the study of human movement. Obviously, if you're doing, I personally suggest if you haven't, go to a body mapping workshop. Amy Litgar, Leah Peterson, there's tons of other wonderful, extraordinarily talented teachers and musicians who are flutists who do present body mapping. Amy is also an Alexander teacher like myself. Study with an Alexander teacher, Feldenkrais, cranial sacral work, anything. Just have it because it is really experiential and it really does make a difference physically, mentally, and physically. But it's somatics. It's the study of human movement. That's what we're what we're alluding to right now, just for further exploration. But what I wanted to say about this idea of the good posture, maybe it's not an idea of good posture anymore. Maybe we're challenging that, and how do you get out of that? Working with an Alexander teacher, in this case, from my little example that I'm giving to you. Now, again, I usually have this written up behind me, but I'm going to talk to you about the senses. Now, you know that we can easily rattle off five senses, right? Very easy. I'm going to propose to you guys something that most people don't know about. It's really not taught about, though I was very pleasantly surprised when I was Googling literally the other day. It's finally making it into the internet. We actually have a sixth sense. And that sixth sense has two words that are interchangeable, either proprioception or the kinesthetic sense. Now, when talking about the kinesthetic sense, our sixth sense, I don't like to actually override it. I don't like to say, hey, you have a sixth sense. Okay, now next. I want to explore this. I really think that it's important for us to remind ourselves because it's this sixth sense is how we perceive ourselves to be. So, to give you a little bit of an example, I'm going to ask you guys just to place a hand from behind you, and you don't. It's not touching, but just place the hand from behind, and I want you to notice that you would verbally be able to describe the position of the hand behind you. Just feel it, use your sense of sensation of feeling. But you'd be able to verbally, you'd be able to say, well, my fingers are curled, my palm is cupped. Some of you might have fingers straight and palms flattened. So everyone's hand is different. But I'm going to ask you to start wiggling your fingers from behind you. You're just wiggling the fingers from behind. And I'm going to ask you to stop. And you're going to leave your hand behind you. And what I'm going to do is take my hand in front, and you can see that my fingers visually are different than how you perceive your fingers from behind. Does that make sense? So now I'm going to ask you guys, we're going to close our eyes, and you can see me. I'm going to take my glasses off just for a moment. I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm going to ask you guys to do this as well. You're going to take a first finger. It doesn't matter which hand that you are, but you're going to take a first finger and physically touch your nose. And what I'm going to ask you to do then now, without using your eyes and without caution, just freely lift your first finger up to the ceiling, raise, and then circle around, and you can come back towards your nose. It's pretty easy. Let's just try that two more times. You're going to actually take your finger and point to the left of you, and you're going to circle around, and you're going to come back towards your nose. Touch your nose with that first finger. Now it's getting a little bit easier. Maybe the first time was a little uncertain, but now you're like, oh, that's easy. Now you're going to take your first finger and go to the right, and you're going to actually come back towards your nose. And now you can gently open up your eyes, and you can notice that you didn't need your eyes to actually do that. Again, it's the sense of perception of oneself. Now, the third example I like to give about the kinesthetic sense, because I actually tie in imagination. I will be honest with you guys, imagination is sort of like controversial now within the Alexander community because some teachers don't like to use imagination. I personally do because we're artists and we use imagination anyway. So I personally like to encourage it. I don't rely on it, but it is part of my teaching and it's part of who I am as an individual anyway. I'm going to ask you guys to, again, it doesn't matter which hand you use, but I'm going to ask you guys to deliberately point your first finger up straight up to the ceiling. And using observation and awareness, I'm going to ask you to notice how that feels, right? Now we're using the sensation of feeling. Now, what you're going to do is let your first finger curl, because at rest, the human fingers are bent, they're curled, at rest. So you're going to now imagine using your eyes that you actually have a magic rope attached to the first finger. And that magic rope is going to go all the way through the ceiling into the sky. And this magic rope now is going to start leading the tip of the first finger, starting to go up straight, pointing up to the sky. But you're watching the knuckles coming out of the palm of the hand and through the entire finger until that first finger is being led up to by that magic rope up to the ceiling, pointing up to the sky. Now, again, this is the point where I generally ask in an interactive live audience, or when I do presentations, I ask, what was your experience? So if we can ask either Francesca or Jessica or Darwin to actually share what their experiences, that would be great.
Yeah, for me, it the I think the more that I was trying to just like let go of thinking about doing it and focus on feeling doing it, it got easier. And it felt like, oh yeah, like it actually is a sensation of the finger lifting, and I don't actually have to work that hard.
Wonderful. Does Jessica want to say anything?
Mine was shaking.
See, this is what I love. I love it, love it, love. Does Darwin want to say anything? This, I love it. Maybe the connection, um, but it's okay. But regardless, what I was gonna say is everybody's single experience is different. I love that, the fact that yours was, Jessica's was shaking, and Francesca had a different, smoother experience. But what I love about this is everyone's experience is different. However, one thing that we cannot deny is knowing that it's a kinesthetic imagination, and that actually has a muscular effect, right? Using your imagination has a muscular effect. So we're engaging ourselves in that sense as well. So that's why I don't personally, even through the body mapping presentations and stuff, I don't like to breeze through the kinesthetic sense, because it's something that is not really taught. It's not in our forefront in our consciousness. But the more that you talk about it, the more that you close your eyes, you do these things, you do your hand behind, you do, and this is something that every single one of you as educator can use. Actually, you don't have to be an Alexander teacher or a body mapper to actually teach this to your students, because we want everybody to, especially those of you who do teach using a lot of imagination, you want them to understand it does have a muscular effect, but it is part of your kinesthetic sense, which is your perception of yourself in an conscious way. So that's something that I really think is very, 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 very important to actually talk about. So now I'm going to ask you guys, those of you who have had that drawing of the spine and your neck muscles. This, again, comes from an exercise I usually do when I give presentations, such as chair work. And what I'm going to do right now is actually kind of cut to the chase a little bit. But first, before we do this, because I want Jessica and Francesca to actually give us a visual, can you guys actually point to where you know or perceive the top of your spine to be? Just to point. Yes, that's a general area that I would say a good 99.9% of people actually do. So you guys are both in the right area, but I want to tweak it a little bit more with something that's authentic from within. And this is the principles of body mapping, which I feel is like the driver's ed of Alexander's technique, quite frankly. It's a really great blueprint, because it was discovered by Bill and Barbara Conable in the 90s, and they talk about body mapping. I will say, sorry if you hear the noise out here, because in New York we're having a snowstorm, and yet another snowstorm, and there's people using plows, so excuse the noise. But but Bill and Barbara Conable discovered body mapping because they recognized students were moving in the way they believed they were designed to move. So that's why I had you guys, draw your spine and shade in where your neck muscles are. Francesca said it perfectly in the beginning, because now we want to go by our perception. I want to show where our authenticity really actually is. The actual top of the spine actually is in the this is another thing. In the Alexander technique, we talk in between the ears and just behind the nose. Now, if you were taking a body mapping workshop, you would go right by your under behind your earlobes, and you would actually find that bony protrusion there behind the earlobes. And if you would take your thumbs and then you take your first finger on the top layer of the teeth, and you rock gently, and I mean extremely gently, rock your head up and down, that's where the top of the spine meets the skull. So, in my opinion, the reason why I explained it in both ways, between the ears, behind your nose, and then right behind the earlobes, because it's a little bit more complicated than that. What is the spine? Do you include a spinal cord? So, that's the main thing. But if we're actually from a body mapping point of view, if we're talking just the skeletal bone, you really do need to go behind the earlobe right there, and that's where you can actually locate the top of the spine. So it's more centered than you think. So most people, when they're pointing to back here, that's a great idea of where you have your top of the spine. But guess what? You're pointing to muscle, and if you're going to be moving from there, guess what you're doing? You're contracting the musculature, and that's what's causing. And there's the phalanges. I mean, I'm being fancy by naming things. This is not an anatomy lesson, but you definitely want to know that you are engaging muscles unnecessarily. And if you're thinking that this is a joint, that's a problem. But if you can really find, and the beautiful part about this work, body mapping, Feldenkrais, Alexander technique, Muse muscle, it's about self-discovery and how do you get into balance. So referring to that first photo I showed you, well, I should say the second photo with the girl who had the arrows, she was in a state of balance. But if you can recall, and we'll pull up that picture momentarily later, you can see that the other flutist was a little bit more compromised in her use, in her setup, in the way she approaches playing, in this example, the flute. So now what we're going to do is actually, I'm going to screen share with you guys um, your neck muscles. And we're going to actually talk, well, let's talk about the spine first. What is the structure and where is its weight-bearing portion? I'm going to show you this. You can see that this is a model of a spine, and you actually, in reality, have four natural curves to it. You have the first one in here, which is coccyx and the sacrum, and it's fused together. But here in the lumbar region, you have the second curve, the third curve and the thoracic, and the fourth, which is in your cervical, up and through the neck, right? So if I were to take, and here you have, I think this is the neatest thing on the planet, the top vertebrae of the vertebra, sorry, is acts like a ledge for your skull. Isn't it's the neatest thing? If you guys ever had a chance to look, you can see it has these little notches in here, and the skull, which actually you can see that little hole there. That's where the brainstem and the spinal cord go through. Non ho trovato questo contenuto. Sorry, guys. Sorry for that. You have the head go right here, and that's what allows you to say yes and swivel no. I think that's one of the most neatest things that the human body actually has. And if you can see the relationship to what your spine is made out of, you have discs. And I want to point this out to you all. You see this red thing here. This is not what we have. This actually is an example for medical students to understand of what a slip disc or a bulging disc is. But it is not anatomically what we have. This is just as an example. But you do have bones, which is vertebrae, and you have discs, which are like a gelatin spongy material. So you can imagine that your head, kilos is about 6 kilos, it's about 10 to 15 pounds. Doesn't matter if it's man or woman, your head is 10 to 15 pounds of weight that is compressed onto your spine. Now, if we learn to free our musculature, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you really quickly because I'm moving it along. This is where your neck muscles are. You can see how you actually have multiple layers of neck muscles. Again, usually if I was in a live audience, I would actually be demonstrating on people just to show where the neck muscles are. But here you can see on the left superficial muscles. Well, this in the middle is more superficial muscles. But can you have your eyes in the front here and look where it goes in the back? It goes a lot lower. So with this particular example here, I am going to ask you guys not to look at it with your eyes this way. I'd love for you to guys cut it in half this way. You can see that on this side is on top of this side. And you can see that this side is on top of that side, right? If your eyes can adjust to that. So you can see that the neck muscles go in the front just about here. They go very wide out to the side, but look how low they go in the back. Right there. It goes till about T12 of the spine. So I like to think of the neck muscles as draping down over our bust like a velvet curtain. That's the way I like to talk and use imagery. Those of you who are not from the north and don't know, only hot weather and stuff, just think of velvet material and it's like draped down, very majestic. But we have many layers of neck muscles, and again, not an anatomy lesson, but let's use some of this idea for actually comparing using imagination and giving some verbal instruction of how to free the neck muscles, and then we're going to play the flute again. So I'm gonna now that we've discovered where our neck muscles are here, right, and lower in the back, I'm gonna ask you to actually take 2 fingers, and you're gonna use imagination. I'm gonna turn to the side. You don't have to turn to the side, but you're gonna imagine that your fingertips are touching, and it's forming a metal rod. And what you're going to do is actually press your head back and down on this metal rod. And you're going to say, ah. And I want you to notice how, try that a couple times, but I want you to notice how that feels and sounds. For me, it sounds a little constrained. It doesn't feel very comfortable. I'm going to use imagination using the power of the mind. And I'm going to say to myself, now that I've discovered where my neck muscles actually really are, I'm going to free them. I'm going to command them to be free. So my head is going to be rotating on that metal rod. So I'm freeing my neck muscles, and I'm going to just produce the sound ah, ah. And notice how that sounds and feels. So if you need to do that one more time, please feel free just to make a comparison. But we want to make sure that, it's like the head is on a metal rod. And you go ah, and notice how that sounds and feels. And using the power of your mind, you allow your neck muscles to be free, front, sides, and back, and your head rotates, and you say, ah, and notice how that feels, right? So now I'm going to ask you to do is pick up your instrument. In this case, for the flutist, please pick up and play the same 2 phrases that you did before. Just take a moment. And a percussionist, they can do on a pad. Notice how that feels. Pianists, any string players, notice if there's any different of a relationship to your sense of using awareness and observation and awareness. Notice if there's a different sense in your balance in the way you're picking up the instrument. So now what I'm going to ask you, and compare that to the first time that you actually did that. So now what I'm going to ask you to do is actually, because I'm looking at my my notes here, which is going to be fun. So I'm going to ask you guys, if you don't have any book right in front of you, it's okay, but take a book, read literally 2 sentences. If you need like to pull something up on your cell phone, you can use your cell phone as well. And you can read, literally take a moment just to read. Just take a moment to read. So I'm just going to read maybe 2 sentences myself. And then I'm going to ask you to stop. Now, that was a very easy activity to do. We're human beings. We're in constant activity. What I'm going to ask you to do right now is to actually take a hand from behind you. And I'm going to ask you to actually now this time place a hand on the back of your head. And what I'd love for you to do, I mean, it's just quite funny because I can't use the cold weather analogy, but I can talk to you about. We've all known about memory foam, the Tempur-Pedic's memory foam. Imagine that your hand is making a handprint on a memory foam from the back of your head. So you should actually have a sensation of notice how long your fingers are. Don't push, don't strain, don't twist your wrist or anything like that, but just gently place your hand on the back of your head. Sense that memory foam from behind. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to do is take that hand away, but really don't let go of that memory foam hand, right? Now, read the same passage again. And as you're reading, I'm going to ask you if you were aware of anything different from the second time that you read as opposed to the first time that you read. Does maybe we can ask Francesca or Jessica to actually chime in and share?
Yeah, I was really tense the first time I was reading. I noticed my neck was really stiff. And then after I put my hand on it, it kind of served as a reminder that I didn't need to work so hard.
Right, right. And before I continue, does Jessica want to say anything? No pressure to say yes or no.
Sure. No, I noticed for me it was actually tense right around here, which I thought was weird.
And was that the first time or the second time?
I didn't realize the first time that I was tense, but the second time it
There was
was
an awareness. There was
looser.
something aware.
Yeah.
Right. So what's interesting, some people experience, and I'm not saying if you didn't get it, that doesn't matter because you are where you are now. It took me a long time to understand that phrase. I am accepting where I am now, but some people actually use themselves very differently because now they recognize that they have this first joint, which I didn't say before, but it's called the AO joint, the Atlantis occipital joint. Again, it's not an anatomy lesson, but it's a major joint, right, that we have there, right? Some people actually recognize that they just dropped their head down and they picked up the book a little bit differently, right? So I definitely want to actually ask you um, to do one more exercise, and then we're going to do playing the instrument again, and we're going to make a comparison from beginning to end. Now, there was one thing that I wasn't clear about in the beginning, that it's okay if you were sitting down or standing up, or you can actually, I mean, especially for the flutist and upper string players or upper woodwinds and stuff, you can stand up or sit down. So there's no fixed way of having to be when you're playing your instrument. But I'm going to ask you right now, we're going to go through an exercise and then we're going to come back to our instruments before we wrap things up. So you're going to take a blank side of the piece of paper. Oh, and by the way, I'm hoping that you guys learned that how your spine looks like in reality and where your neck muscles are is a lot different from when you perceived when you drew them. So that was the main takeaway that I would love for all of you to have. But I'm going to ask you now to take the empty side of the piece of paper. You're going to take your pencil, and you're actually going to do an activity, and it's a very easy one. What you're going to do is write your first name and last name, and you're not going to stop. You're going to write your first name, last name, write your first name, last name, and you're going to go over and over and over without stopping, and you're going to make not columns as such, but you're just going to write your first and last name over and over, and you're not going to stop. And I'm going to give you like 10 seconds to get going before I start bringing awareness into it. So we're going to still use awareness and observation as you're writing your first and last name. Now, remember that we talked about the five senses with inclusive awareness of your sixth sense that we have. We're going to use eyesight right now. So I want your eyes to focus as you're writing. You don't have to move your head. Notice the four corners of the piece of paper that you're writing on. And just keep on writing. Don't stop writing. You're consistently writing. And you might even notice the speed that you're writing. There's no right or wrong, by the way. It's just noticing the speed, but using the four corners, using your eyes, four corners of the piece of paper. And then what we're going to do is expand your eyesight and use your peripheral vision from the four corners of the piece of paper. I want you to notice how much further you can see outside of the four corners of the piece of paper without any strain. That's very important, without any strain. Now, having said that, I want to include breathing. How is your breath as you're doing this? And as you continue to write over and over again, with your expanded, soft eyes, using peripheral vision, and you're noticing your breath, I'm going to ask you, believe it or not, to use your hearing. Now, how is your hearing? And what I mean by that is, what can you pick up? Like, it could be the humming of your computer. That's a sound. You can be, in my case, snow blowers, um, the humming of the electricity, or anything of that sort. So you're using your hearing. So now you're still writing. You're noticing your breath. Your eyes are your vision is expanding very softly, and you are noticing your what sounds are around you. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is notice your feet, your connectivity to your feet onto the floor. How are your legs? How are they balanced? And you're still writing, and you notice your breath, your eyesight is soft, and your hearing. And then I'm going to ask you to notice your touch of the pencil, Just notice how you're touching the pencil on all of this. Is it gripping? Is it too loose? Visually, your handwriting might be evolving in a different way. Some people say it's sloppier, some people say it's neater. Everyone's experience is different. And then I would love for you to notice the perception of your depth from above you, below you, in front of you, and in back. So some of you may have a very vivid, clear distinction of what's from behind you, but I want to encourage you to notice what's behind you a little bit more. And on each side of you, and above you, and in front of you, and below you, the connectivity of your feet. So going back to the beginning, your soft eyes, the four corners of the piece of paper, you're sensing yourself peripherally expanding, and then you're noticing your breath. You're noticing the tactile touch of your hand to the pencil. You're noticing the connectivity of your feet onto the floor, how your legs are in relationship. And then you're sensing all around you, your sensory awareness from all around. Now, I am going to ask you to stop for just a moment, and I'm going to ask Jessica or Francesca just to quickly mention what their experience was.
I noticed at first my eyes felt really strained. And then when you had us do the four corners exercise, I was able to kind of like come back to, and my eyes softened a little bit. And then also when I started focusing on the breathing and the dimensions, I I felt more relaxed and I noticed that I really wasn't breathing when I was doing it. And once I started the breath, everything else kind of felt more natural.
Jessica, is it anything you would like to add?
I actually thought it was a really relaxing exercise, so I felt really good the whole time. So I don't know. I
This
did
is
get
this
sloppy.
is great this is your personal experience, right?
Yeah.
But again, I do not want to put words into your personal experience, but when you said relaxing and all that stuff,
Mhm.
there's something that you are rebalancing from within, right? Some people actually notice that they start this way, and by the end, they're more upright in an effortless way. So if we can pull up those two photos, I'm going to stop screen sharing. If we can pull up those two photos just to make a comparison, you can see that I believe it would be the first person, the first flutist in recital, I believe, um, she is pulled down. But Francesca, you can pull those up. Thank you. It'll just be a moment, folks. And yes, perfect. The first we want to, yes, you can see that this person now, maybe hopefully my language is a little bit more clear. The head being pulled down too much forward, and you can actually, well, if I was there, I would be able to say you can see the rib cage region, the legs, the connectivity to of the thighs and everything. If we can pull up the second picture, you can see that the arrows make much more sense, and this flutist actually is playing in a much more effortless, balanced way. So that's why when I saying to you, about your setup, it's not about setting up perfectly, but it's your set. Like for myself as a violist, I need a good setup, meaning my chin rest and shoulder rest need to be appropriate for me, and then the use of my arms. Clearly, flutists use their arms, pianists use their arms, percussionists use their arms, and that's a whole nother other subject about the use of the arms. But what I'm talking about is what we just did from beginning till this point is we didn't do anything. We were just using the power of the mind, quite frankly. And you hopefully, and I'm going to ask you now with being muted, if you can pick up your instrument again, just to see if you can allow the instrument to come to you. And those of you who are a pianist, obviously the piano can't come to you, but you don't have to sink into the piano. Maybe the chair has to be adjusted or something like that. Maybe you've already done a lot of adjustments, but maybe it might be different now. Play with it because you want to have fun with it. Think of knowing that what your spine is made out of, knowing the weight of the head in relationship to your neck muscles. If you can allow your neck muscles to be free, so this way your head can balance on top of a lengthening spine, it affects your breath. Thinking of that sensory awareness. That, and then also another thing is when you're coming into a practice room, your lesson or a recital space or a concert or space, believe it or not, take in the depth of the room. Look at how tall the ceiling is because you really have a lot of much more space than what most people tend to think about. And that goes into another category of talking about anxiety and stage fright and all that stuff. Because if you have all these things integrated with in yourself, I can speak from personal experience. Have I still gotten nervous? Yes, absolutely. However, it doesn't overtake me as opposed to before I started this kind of work and journey in my life. It's a very different experience. Yes, I still get nervous, but it's not devastating as it was in the past, because if I'm thinking of all my integration and balance from within and I'm taking in the three-dimensional depth of perception of my surroundings, I don't have time to be nervous because I'm there to make music. So all of us are there to make music. So that's basically the gist of my little presentation. Do apologize I went over, but you can see that there was a lot for me just to go through, just to make. I hope that you guys had a difference in the when you played in the beginning, and you can see the little teeny tiny story and the little production I gave to you guys, how there is an evolution that you can do just by using the power of your mind with a little education. And I think Alexander technique and body mapping and muse muscle and Feldenkrais and cranial sacral, even Tai Chi, all of that is just wonderful somatic works that you just add to your life, and you're just taking care of your organic body. And I just want to say thank you guys for having me and letting me take this opportunity to explain my little setup talk.
Great. Thank you so much. It was our pleasure to have you. We're so happy that you could join us. That was an amazing presentation. I definitely noticed a difference before and after in my playing. And we'd love to have you back in the future. Hopefully we can continue to work with you. And if anyone has any questions, just feel free to drop a comment on the video, or you can send us an email, and all that information's in the description. So I'll let Jessica chime in quickly, and then we'll wrap things up. Thank you, Eddy.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Eddy. That was wonderful. It's always nice to hear these ideas coming from somebody who's actually a practicing performer, as well as a student of the body and resources that we have. So thank you. Yes, and next week we will be continuing our sessions. We will dive into a little bit more on wellness and visualization. So that concept you left us with right at the end, Eddy, of using the power of our mind, that ties right in. So thank you so much. And we will see you next Sunday here again from 5 to 5:15-ish, or 4 to 4:15 Central.